Melissa Anderson's blue Chevy Impala was last seen leaving the Juniper Creek High School reunion in rural Camden County, Missouri, on the night of August 12, 2002. The Ozarks were shrouded in summer fog, the winding roads slick with dew as Melissa drove away. At 11:22 p.m., she left a voicemail for her sister, saying she was taking a detour to watch the meteor shower from our old spot. By morning, both Melissa and her car had vanished without a trace. For 20 years, the mystery of what happened that night haunted the small town of Lakeview. What truly occurred on those back roads would remain hidden until a shocking discovery brought the past rushing back to the present. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. On the night of August 12, 2002, the name Melissa Anderson became tied to a mystery that would haunt Camden County for decades to come. Melissa, 26, was a beloved elementary school teacher with bright eyes and an infectious laugh that students and colleagues adored. She lived in a small blue house on Maple Street in Lakeview, Missouri, just a mile from the school where she taught third grade. The only daughter of Robert and Helen Anderson, Melissa was known for her kindness, creativity, and the colorful classroom decorations that transformed learning into adventure. That August evening, Melissa had attended her 5-year high school reunion at Juniper Creek High, wearing a navy dress she'd been excited about for weeks. Friends remembered her laughing, sharing stories about her students, and dancing to early 2000s hits that echoed through the gymnasium. She arrived in her blue Chevy Impala, license plate MO452FHT, parking it beneath the oak trees that lined the school's entrance. As the reunion wound down around 10:30 p.m., Melissa hugged old friends goodbye, promising to meet for coffee soon. Several people recalled seeing her climb into her Impala, headlights cutting through the summer fog that had settled over the parking lot. She waved once more before driving away, the taillights of her car disappearing down the winding road that led toward Highway 54. That was the last time anyone saw Melissa Anderson alive. By morning, her absence was immediately noticed. Melissa had planned to have breakfast with her parents at their farmhouse just outside town. When she didn't arrive and wasn't answering calls, her mother grew concerned. Melissa was never late, Helen would later tell reporters. Not for anything. When she didn't show up by 9, I knew something was wrong. The Andersons tried calling repeatedly, each ring echoing through their kitchen as Robert paced the porch, scanning the gravel road for any sign of his daughter's blue car. By noon, they contacted the Camden County Sheriff's Department to report her missing. Sheriff Thomas Bailey took the call himself. In a town like Lakeview, population 2,800, he knew most residents by name. The Andersons weren't prone to panic, and Melissa had no history of disappearing. I knew right away this wasn't just someone who decided to take a detour, Bailey would later recall. This was serious. Within hours, the Andersons' living room became command central for a grassroots search. Helen pulled out her old printer, hands shaking as she produced flyers with Melissa's photograph, her bright smile and shoulder-length brown hair frozen in time. Missing Melissa Anderson, 26, last seen driving blue Chevy Impala, license MO452FHT. Please call with any information. By nightfall, these flyers appeared throughout Lakeview, taped to store windows, community boards, gas stations, and telephone poles. Friends from the reunion joined the effort, spreading out across town while sharing memories of Melissa from just hours before. She was so happy, her friend Sarah told volunteers. She talked about taking her students camping next month. This doesn't make sense. The Sheriff's Department launched an official search, coordinating with Missouri State Highway Patrol. They traced Melissa's most likely routes home from the reunion, checking ditches and embankments along the winding Ozark roads. Deputies interviewed everyone who attended the reunion, creating a timeline of Melissa's last known movements. A crucial lead emerged when deputies recovered Melissa's final voicemail to her sister Karen, left at 11:22 p.m. "Hey, it's me. The sky is so clear tonight. I'm going to take a quick detour to watch the meteor shower from our old spot. Should be home by midnight. Love you." Our old spot referred to Crescent Point, a scenic overlook above Timber Lake where the sisters had often stargazed growing up. This narrow clue pointed investigators toward the lake region, but the area was vast, miles of forested shoreline with dozens of unmarked access roads. Search teams combed these roads, bringing in boats to scan the shoreline, while volunteers on foot pushed through thick underbrush calling Melissa's name. Dogs tracked scents that faded at the water's edge. Divers explored murky depths near boat ramps where a car might have entered the water, but found nothing. As days stretched into weeks, the search expanded. Helicopters swept low over the terrain. Camera crews from Kansas City and St. Louis arrived, broadcasting Melissa's story statewide. Her photograph appeared on evening news across Missouri, a smiling teacher in a classroom, surrounded by student artwork, now the center of a growing mystery. For a month, Lakeview existed in a state of suspended animation. Parents walked children to school. Doors previously left unlocked were secured at night, and residents glanced twice at unfamiliar vehicles. The reunion attendees were interviewed multiple times, each recounting their last memories of Melissa, desperately searching their minds for any detail that might help. Police explored every angle. Was it an accident on the treacherous Ozark roads? Had Melissa met someone after the reunion? Could she have encountered trouble at the Overlook? Officers investigated Melissa's relationships, finding nothing suspicious. She was well-liked with no known enemies. Her bank accounts remained untouched, her credit cards unused. By October, as autumn painted the Ozarks in fiery colors, the daily searches were scaled back. The command center in the Anderson home slowly transformed back into a living room, though the maps remained on walls and Melissa's photograph still gazed out from the mantel. Media coverage dwindled as newer stories demanded attention. For the outside world, Melissa Anderson gradually became another sad statistic, a missing person case with no resolution. But in Lakeview, her absence left a gaping wound. Her third-grade classroom remained exactly as she'd left it, a substitute teacher reluctantly taking her place. Students drew pictures for Miss Anderson, believing she would return to see them. Her parents left the porch light on every night, a beacon meant to guide their daughter home. Sheriff Bailey refused to shelve the case. "Someone knows something," he repeatedly told his deputies. "People don't just vanish. There's always a trace, always a witness, always something we've missed." By the one-year anniversary, hope had dimmed, but not died. Helen and Robert Anderson held a candlelight vigil at Timber Lake, where hundreds gathered, lanterns reflecting off the water as they shared memories of Melissa. Karen read poems her sister had written in college. Former students, now in 4th grade, sang Melissa's favorite songs. "We will never stop looking," Robert told the crowd, his voice breaking. "Never stop hoping. Somewhere out there is the answer to what happened to our daughter." The case inevitably cooled. New missing persons reports came in, new crimes demanded attention, and newer deputies joined the force without personal connections to Melissa. The file grew thinner each year, moved from active investigations to a growing collection of unsolved cases. By 2007, the 5th anniversary of her disappearance, only Sheriff Bailey and a handful of deputies continued actively pursuing leads. For the Andersons, time passed with agonizing slowness. Helen's hair turned premature gray, her shoulders permanently stooped as if bearing an invisible weight. Robert, once social and outgoing, grew quieter, spending hours in his workshop crafting wooden items Melissa would have loved. They never moved from their farmhouse, never changed their phone number, determined to remain exactly where Melissa would look for them if she ever returned. Karen relocated back to Lakeview, abandoning her career in Kansas City to be closer to her parents. Each year on Melissa's birthday, she baked her sister's favorite chocolate raspberry cake, placing it on the porch with a candle. Each morning, the untouched cake would be quietly removed, the ritual a painful reminder of absence. The rhythm of small-town life continued around the Anderson family. New teachers occupied Melissa's classroom. New students who never knew her sat at the desks, and eventually her disappearance became a somber local legend. Parents warned teenagers about driving alone at night, often invoking Melissa's name. At Juniper Creek High, her graduation photo remained in the hallway, a silent reminder to generations of students. Sheriff Bailey eventually retired in 2015, handing the department over to younger officers, but not before making them promise to keep Melissa's file accessible. "Don't let her be forgotten," he instructed his successor. "Someday someone will remember something, or technology will advance, or pure luck will break this case. Be ready when it happens." Those words would prove prophetic, though the wait would be longer and the resolution more shocking than anyone imagined. By 2022, 20 years had passed since Melissa Anderson disappeared. Her case, officially classified as cold but open, had been revisited periodically by new detectives, each time with diminishing returns. The physical evidence, what little existed, had been preserved, but witnesses' memories had faded, some had moved away, and others had passed on. The technological landscape, however, had transformed dramatically. Social media, smartphones, and DNA testing, all in their infancy in 2002, had revolutionized how missing persons cases were investigated. Amateur sleuths created online communities dedicated to solving cold cases, sharing information and theories across platforms. One such group, Midwest Mystery Divers, had gained substantial following for their work recovering vehicles from bodies of water across the region. Led by former Coast Guard rescue diver Mark Donovan, the team used advanced sonar equipment to locate submerged cars, often bringing closure to families of missing persons. Their YouTube channel, with over 800,000 subscribers, documented their searches and discoveries. In June 2022, Donovan received an unusual email that would change everything. "I followed your channel for years. My aunt went missing in 2002 from Lakeview, Missouri. Her name was Melissa Anderson. Before disappearing, she mentioned going to a place called Crescent Point at Timber Lake. Police searched the area but found nothing. I recently found old maps showing there were 2 overlooks back then, not one. The second was unmarked, hidden by trees, and collapsed in a 2008 landslide. Could her car be underwater there? Please help us. We've waited 20 years. Karen's daughter, Emma." The message caught Donovan's attention immediately. His team had recovered vehicles missed by official searches before, often in locations that seemed obvious in hindsight, but were easily overlooked at the time. After researching the Anderson case and consulting with Emma, Midwest Mystery Divers decided to make the journey to Camden County. Their arrival in Lakeview in early July 2022 caused a stir. The team's recognizable van with sonar equipment and diving gear, parked outside the local diner, sparked conversation. For many younger residents, Melissa's story was something they'd heard about, but never experienced firsthand. For older residents, it reopened wounds barely healed. The current sheriff, Michael Harrison, initially viewed the team with skepticism. "We've had search teams here before," he told Donovan when they met to discuss permits. "This lake's been scanned multiple times over the years." Donovan nodded respectfully. "With all due respect, Sheriff, technology has advanced significantly. What we're using now can detect objects buried under silt that would have been invisible 20 years ago. And if Emma's right about this second overlook, it might never have been properly searched." Harrison reluctantly granted permission, adding, "The Andersons have been through enough. Don't give them false hope." The next morning, Donovan's team set out on Timber Lake, their equipment-laden boat moving slowly along the shoreline where Emma believed the second Crescent Point had once existed. Historical satellite imagery supported her theory, showing a small clearing above a steep embankment that had indeed been altered by a landslide years after Melissa's disappearance. The area was now overgrown, the access road barely visible beneath years of vegetation. If a car had gone into the water here in 2002, nature had conspired to hide all traces from the shore. On the boat, Donovan operated the sonar scanner, watching the screen intently as it painted ghostly images of the lakebed. Hours passed with nothing notable, just the natural contours of the lake bottom, occasional rock formations, and sunken logs. The team methodically covered grid patterns, refusing to rush. As afternoon faded toward evening, the scanner suddenly revealed an anomaly, a distinctly unnatural shape resting in the mud approximately 60 feet below the surface. The rectangular outline was unmistakable to experienced eyes. "That's a vehicle," Donovan said quietly, marking the coordinates. "And it's been down there a long time." Word spread quickly through Lakeview. By the time the dive team prepared to enter the water the next morning, dozens of onlookers had gathered on the shore. Among them stood Robert and Helen Anderson, now in their 70s, holding hands as they had throughout 20 years of uncertainty. Karen stood beside them, arm around her daughter Emma, who had initiated this final search. Sheriff Harrison arrived with deputies, establishing a perimeter and preparing for what they might find. A somber silence fell as the divers disappeared beneath the surface, communication bubbles the only indication of their progress. Underwater, visibility was poor. Decades of silt had nearly buried the vehicle. The divers carefully cleared mud from what appeared to be a license plate, their helmet cameras recording each moment. When they surfaced 40 minutes later, Donovan approached Sheriff Harrison, speaking low enough that only officials could hear. "It's a blue Chevrolet Impala. License plate matches Melissa Anderson's vehicle." Harrison nodded grimly, then walked to where the Anderson family waited. Helen saw his expression and began to tremble, Robert's arm tightening around her shoulders. "We found Melissa's car," Harrison said gently. "I'm so sorry." Helen collapsed against her husband, 20 years of hope giving way to devastating confirmation. Karen rushed to support her mother while Emma stood frozen, the impact of her discovery washing over her. She had been born 3 years after her aunt disappeared, had never known Melissa except through family stories and photographs. Now she had helped find her. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The recovery operation proceeded with meticulous care. A specialized team was called in to raise the vehicle without disturbing potential evidence. 2 days later, as cameras recorded and the community watched in silence, the blue Impala emerged from the depths, water cascading from its rusted frame as it was slowly winched onto a flatbed truck. The car told its own tragic story. All windows were intact but closed. There was no sign of external damage suggesting a collision. The driver's side door was locked, and inside, still secured by a seatbelt in the driver's seat, were Melissa's remains. Initial examination suggested a straightforward, heartbreaking conclusion. Melissa had driven to the overlook to watch the meteor shower, as mentioned in her voicemail, somehow lost control of the vehicle and plunged into the lake. An accident, simple and devastating, hidden by the dark waters for 20 years. But as investigators processed the scene, troubling inconsistencies emerged. The car was in neutral, not drive or park. The keys were not in the ignition, but found in the center console. Most puzzlingly, the driver's seat was pushed unusually far back, too far for someone of Melissa's height to comfortably reach the pedals. These details transformed what had appeared to be a tragic accident into something potentially more sinister. Sheriff Harrison ordered the vehicle transported to a secure facility for forensic analysis, turning what should have been the conclusion of a 20-year mystery into the beginning of a criminal investigation. For the Anderson family, the discovery brought mixed emotions, grief renewed by confirmation, relief in finally knowing, and growing anger at the possibility that someone might have been responsible for Melissa's death. As they made funeral arrangements, they also demanded answers. "We waited 20 years to find her," Robert told reporters outside the sheriff's office. "We can wait a little longer to learn the truth about what happened that night." Forensic experts from the Missouri State Highway Patrol descended on Camden County, bringing advanced technology to examine evidence that had been preserved underwater. Despite the years of submersion, the car yielded surprising clues. Trace DNA was recovered from the steering wheel and gear shift that did not match Melissa's profile. Fibers found caught in the door hinges were inconsistent with what Melissa had been wearing at the reunion. Most telling, examination of Melissa's remains revealed a fracture to the back of her skull that experts concluded had occurred before the car entered the water. Sheriff Harrison called a press conference 1 week after the recovery. Standing before a room packed with reporters and community members, he delivered news that sent shockwaves through Lakeview based on forensic evidence. We are now investigating the death of Melissa Anderson as a homicide. We believe someone was with her that night, someone who may have caused her death and staged it to look like an accident. We are pursuing several leads and will not rest until we have answers. The revelation transformed Lakeview overnight. A community that had mourned a tragic accident now grappled with the possibility that a killer had walked among them for 20 years. Neighbors regarded each other with new suspicion. Who could have wanted to harm the beloved teacher? Who had carried this secret for so long? Deputies revisited everyone connected to the case: reunion attendees, colleagues, friends, and acquaintances. They cross-referenced alibis and statements from 2002 with new information, looking for inconsistencies or details that might have seemed insignificant then but carried new weight now. The DNA recovered from the vehicle was entered into national databases, but no match was immediately found. Investigators began collecting voluntary samples from people connected to Melissa, hoping to find a match that would break the case wide open. Meanwhile, the Anderson family finally laid Melissa to rest in the Lakeview Cemetery beneath a maple tree that reminded them of the street where she'd lived. Hundreds attended the service, including former students, now adults with children of their own, who placed handwritten notes and small drawings on her casket, final assignments for the teacher they had never forgotten. As summer turned to fall in 2022, the investigation continued. Old friendships were tested as suspicions grew. People who had been questioned and cleared years before found themselves under scrutiny again. And in a town where everyone knew everyone, the question lingered: had they been living alongside a killer all this time? As fall descended on Lakeview, the investigation into Melissa Anderson's death gained momentum. Sheriff Harrison's team established a dedicated task force, converting a conference room into a war room plastered with timelines, photographs, and witness statements. The blue Impala, now drained and partially dismantled, remained in a secure garage where forensic technicians meticulously examined every inch. By October 2022, a clearer picture of Melissa's final hours emerged. Cell tower records from 2002, still preserved in carrier archives, confirmed her phone had connected to a tower near Crescent Point at 11:24 p.m., consistent with her voicemail about watching the meteor shower. Security footage from a gas station, unearthed from old evidence boxes, showed Melissa's Impala passing through town at 11:07 p.m. But the most compelling discovery came from re-interviewing Jason Winters, a former classmate who had attended the reunion. In 2002, he'd told investigators he'd seen Melissa leave alone. Now his story changed. "I didn't think it mattered back then," Jason admitted, shifting uncomfortably in the interview room. "I saw Melissa talking to Eric Chambers in the parking lot before she left. They seemed intense, like maybe they were arguing. I didn't mention it because Eric was married, and I didn't want to start rumors." Eric Chambers. The name rippled through the investigation like a stone dropped in still water. He had been in Melissa's graduating class, a former high school football star who'd returned to Lakeview after college, working at his family's construction business. Married to his high school sweetheart with a young daughter, he'd been questioned in 2002 like everyone else at the reunion. He'd stated he left early and went straight home. Deputies pulled Eric's original statement. He had claimed to leave the reunion at 9:45 p.m., long before Melissa. His wife had corroborated his alibi, saying he was home by 10:15 p.m. With no evidence suggesting otherwise, investigators had moved on. Sheriff Harrison studied Eric's file, noting that he had left Lakeview in 2003, relocating to Columbia, Missouri, where he'd built a successful commercial construction company. Now 46, he was divorced, remarried, and a prominent business figure in the community. "Bring him in," Harrison ordered. "Carefully. No warrants yet, just a friendly conversation about his old classmate." Two deputies made the 2-hour drive to Columbia, locating Eric at his office in a gleaming glass building bearing the Chamber's construction logo. He agreed to speak with them, his handsome face showing appropriate concern about Melissa's recent discovery. "Terrible tragedy," he said, offering the deputies coffee in his spacious office adorned with construction awards and family photos. "I heard they found her car. After all these years, who would have thought?" The conversation remained casual as deputies asked about his memories of the reunion, his relationship with Melissa, whether he'd noticed anything unusual that night. Eric's answers were measured, consistent with his original statement. He remembered Melissa as a nice girl, smart, but denied any close friendship. He maintained he'd left early, gone home to his wife and infant daughter. "I don't know what else I can tell you," he concluded. "It was 20 years ago. We were just classmates who grew up in the same small town." The deputies thanked him and left, but not before noting the tension in his shoulders, the slight tremor in his hand as he set down his coffee cup. In their report to Harrison, they included a crucial observation. Eric had asked no questions about how Melissa died or why they were reinvestigating after 20 years. That subtle omission spoke volumes. Background checks revealed more about Eric's life since leaving Lakeview. His construction business had struggled initially before securing several lucrative government contracts in 2007. His first marriage had ended in 2008, with court records showing financial disputes. His current wife was a real estate developer he'd met in 2010. They lived in an expansive home in Columbia's wealthiest neighborhood. More telling was what former classmates recalled about Eric and Melissa's past. Several remembered them dating briefly during senior year, information never highlighted in the original investigation. Karen confirmed this detail, adding that Melissa had broken things off before graduation, though she never explained why. Eric didn't take it well, Karen told detectives. He kept trying to get back together with her in college when they were both at Mizzou. Melissa eventually blocked his number. "I didn't think about it during the original investigation. It seemed so long ago, and he was married by then. The reunion now took on new significance. It was the first time Eric and Melissa had seen each other in years. What had happened in that parking lot conversation? Had old feelings or resentments resurfaced? Sheriff Harrison secured a search warrant for Eric's cell phone records from 2002. Though most providers purged such old data, a stroke of luck revealed that Eric's carrier had been acquired in 2003, and during the corporate merger, archives had been preserved for legal reasons. The records contradicted Eric's statement. His phone had connected to towers near Timber Lake between 11:30 p.m. and 12:45 a.m. on the night Melissa disappeared, long after he claimed to be home. More damning, his phone and Melissa's had pinged the same tower at the same time, placing them together at Crescent Point. Harrison called an emergency meeting with the district attorney. "We need to bring him in for formal questioning," he insisted. "The DNA from the car should be ready soon. If it matches Chambers, we've got him." The DA reviewed the evidence and nodded. "Proceed carefully. This man has resources, connections. We need this case airtight." Before they could make their move, a surprising development accelerated the investigation. Eric's first wife, Jennifer, now remarried and living in Kansas City, contacted the sheriff's office after seeing news reports about Melissa's case. "I've carried this for 20 years, she said, voice trembling over the phone. "I lied back then." Eric wasn't home at 10:15 that night. He didn't come home until almost 2 a.m. When he finally showed up, he was soaking wet, said his car had gotten stuck in mud, and he had to push it out. She paused, gathering courage. "The next morning, I found a woman's bracelet in his jacket pocket. When I asked about it, he got angry, said it was a gift for me he wanted to keep secret. But I recognized it. It looked like one Melissa used to wear in high school. I knew something was wrong, but I was 26 with a baby, financially dependent on him. I was scared. Jennifer agreed to provide a formal statement, adding that their marriage had deteriorated after that night, with Eric becoming controlling and volatile until their divorce years later. Harrison ordered surveillance on Eric while expediting the DNA comparison. Within days, the results arrived. The foreign DNA in Melissa's car was a match to Eric Chambers. They had their suspect. On November 15, 2022, a multi-agency team surrounded Eric's Columbia home at dawn. FBI agents joined local police, approaching with tactical precision. Eric was arrested while preparing for work, the confusion on his face turning to resignation as officers read his rights. News of the arrest exploded across Missouri. Headlines blared, "Arrest in 20-year-old cold case. Successful businessman charged with former classmate's murder. Lakeview cold case breaks wide open." Television crews descended on both Columbia and Lakeview, hunting for comments from associates, relatives, and community members. In Lakeview, reactions were mixed. Older residents who remembered both Melissa and Eric expressed shock. "He was always such a nice boy," said his former football coach. "Star athlete, good student, hard to believe he could do something like this." Others weren't surprised. "There was always something off about him," remarked a former classmate. "He couldn't handle rejection, couldn't stand not getting his way." When Melissa broke up with him, he spread rumors about her for months. The Andersons watched the coverage in silent disbelief. The idea that someone they'd known, someone who had attended Melissa's memorial service in 2002, who had hugged them and offered condolences, might have been responsible for their daughter's death, was almost too painful to process. "All these years," Robert whispered, holding his wife's hand as they watched Eric's face on the evening news. "He was living his life, building his business, while our daughter was at the bottom of that lake." Eric was extradited to Camden County, appearing for arraignment in the same courthouse where Melissa's missing person case had been reviewed years earlier. He pleaded not guilty to first-degree murder, his attorney citing the lack of eyewitnesses and the compromised nature of evidence submerged for 2 decades. The prosecutor presented their case to the judge, cell phone records placing Eric with Melissa, DNA evidence from the car, Jennifer's testimony about his late return home wet and agitated, the bracelet, and the skull fracture indicating Melissa had been struck before entering the water. Bail was denied, and Eric was remanded to county jail to await trial. His attorney immediately began filing motions to suppress evidence, questioning chain of custody for the DNA and challenging the cell phone records as potentially corrupted by time. Meanwhile, investigators continued building their case. They theorized that Eric had followed Melissa to Crescent Point, perhaps arranging to meet her there after their parking lot conversation. Something had happened, an argument, a rejection, an unwanted advance, leading to violence. The skull fracture suggested Melissa had been struck, possibly with a rock or other object of opportunity. Then Eric had staged the scene, placing her unconscious or already deceased body in the driver's seat, pushing the car into the lake, and swimming to shore. The case captivated the public's imagination. True crime podcasts devoted episodes to analyzing every detail. Online forums debated evidence and motives. Journalists dug into Eric's past, uncovering a pattern of controlling behavior in relationships and business dealings. Former girlfriends came forward with stories of his jealousy and volatility when things didn't go his way. As winter settled over the Ozarks, the case against Eric Chambers grew stronger. Forensic experts from the FBI laboratory recovered partial fingerprints from the gear shift of Melissa's car that matched Eric's right index finger. Soil samples from the lake matched microscopic particles found preserved in the cuffs of a jacket Jennifer had kept from their marriage, the same jacket where she'd found the bracelet. Perhaps most damning was the recovery of security footage from a convenience store 10 miles from Crescent Point. The grainy video, salvaged from a forgotten box of evidence, showed a man matching Eric's description buying a coffee at 1:37 a.m. the night Melissa disappeared. He was visibly wet, his hair plastered to his head, paying with cash and avoiding the camera. The store owner, now elderly but sharp-minded, remembered the encounter when shown the footage. "Struck me as odd," he told detectives. "August night, warm out, but this fellow comes in soaking wet, shivering. Didn't say much, kept his head down." By January 2023, prosecutors felt confident enough to take the case to a grand jury, which returned an indictment on charges of first-degree murder and tampering with evidence. If convicted, Eric faced life imprisonment without possibility of parole. His defense team fought back aggressively, hiring expert witnesses to challenge the forensic findings and filing motion after motion to delay proceedings. Eric's construction company spent lavishly on his defense, bringing in attorneys from St. Louis and Kansas City who specialized in challenging cold cases. The legal battle dragged through spring and summer, each hearing bringing the Andersons back to the courthouse, where they sat silently watching the man accused of killing their daughter. Helen aged visibly during this time, the stress of reliving Melissa's death taking a physical toll. Robert remained stoic, attending every hearing despite his own failing health. Behind the scenes, prosecutors worried about the case. Despite the compelling circumstantial evidence, they lacked an eyewitness or confession. The defense had successfully challenged several pieces of evidence as potentially compromised by time and water damage. The trial date was set for September 2023, and both sides prepared for what would likely be the most significant criminal proceeding in Camden County's history. Then came the breakthrough no one expected. In late July, a maintenance worker at Juniper Creek High School was clearing out an old storage room when he discovered a box of disposable cameras. The cameras, left over from the 2002 reunion, had never been developed. Curious, he turned them over to the current principal, who recognized their potential significance and contacted Sheriff Harrison. The 20-year-old film was carefully processed by specialists. Most images were typical reunion photos. Groups of friends posing, people dancing, buffet tables laden with food. But 3 frames from one camera captured something crucial: Melissa in the parking lot, clearly arguing with Eric. The final shot showed them walking towards separate cars. Eric looking back at Melissa with an expression that, even through the grainy, time-degraded image, could only be described as furious. The photographs contradicted Eric's statement that he'd had minimal interaction with Melissa and left before her. They placed them together at the exact time he claimed to be driving home. When confronted with these images during a pre-trial hearing, Eric's composure finally cracked. After a whispered conference with his attorneys, he requested a meeting with the district attorney. The plea deal was announced on August 18, 2023. Eric Chambers would plead guilty to second-degree murder in exchange for a 25-year sentence. He would provide a full confession detailing exactly what happened the night Melissa died. In a courtroom packed with media, community members, and the entire Anderson family, Eric stood before the judge and admitted his guilt. His voice, once confident and commanding, now wavered as he recounted that night. "I saw Melissa at the reunion, and all those old feelings came back," he began. "She looked beautiful, successful, everything I remembered. I tried talking to her inside, but she was cold, dismissive. When she was leaving, I followed her to the parking lot." Eric described arguing with Melissa, trying to reminisce about their relationship while she repeatedly rebuffed him. "She told me she'd never really cared about me, that I should focus on my wife and stop living in the past. When she got in her car, I asked where she was going. She mentioned watching the meteor shower at Crescent Point. According to Eric, he drove home initially, but couldn't stop thinking about their conversation. Angry and humiliated, he decided to confront her again. He drove to Crescent Point, finding her alone, watching the sky from the hood of her car. We argued again. I grabbed her arm, tried to make her listen. She pulled away, threatened to tell my wife I was harassing her. Something just snapped in me. There was a rock nearby. I hit her with it before I even realized what I was doing. The courtroom was silent as Eric described panicking, checking for a pulse and finding none. Afraid of being caught, he staged the scene, placing Melissa in the driver's seat, moving the car into neutral and pushing it into the lake. He swam to shore, hiked back to his vehicle and drove home, stopping at the convenience store for coffee when he realized how suspicious he looked, soaking wet. "I've lived with this every day for 20 years, he concluded. Every success I've had, every moment with my children, every normal day was stolen from Melissa. I can't undo what I did, but I can finally tell the truth." Judge Marshall accepted the plea, sentencing Eric to 25 years in prison without possibility of early parole. As bailiffs led him away, he looked toward the Anderson family, mouthing, "I'm sorry," before disappearing through the courtroom door. Outside the courthouse, reporters clamored for statements. The district attorney emphasized that justice, though delayed, had finally been served. Sheriff Harrison credited the dedication of everyone involved, from the original investigators to the Midwest mystery divers who found the car. "This case proves that time may complicate justice, but it doesn't prevent it," he stated firmly. For the Andersons, the conclusion brought complicated emotions. The confirmation of Melissa's murder was painful, but Eric's admission provided answers they had sought for 2 decades. Helen spoke briefly to reporters, her voice steady despite her tears. "Today doesn't bring Melissa back to us. Nothing can do that. But knowing the truth matters. Having answers matters. And knowing that the person responsible will face consequences matters." In the aftermath, Lakeview began its own healing process. The school board voted to rename the elementary school library in Melissa's honor. A permanent memorial was established at Timber Lake, featuring a bench overlooking the water with a simple plaque: "Melissa Anderson, beloved daughter, teacher, friend." Gone but never forgotten. The story gained national attention, featured on true crime shows and in magazine articles, highlighting the persistence of the Anderson family and the role of technological advances in solving cold cases. Midwest mystery divers saw their YouTube subscribers double, using their platform to advocate for funding to investigate similar cases across the country. Emma, Karen's daughter who had initiated the search that found Melissa, established a scholarship in her aunt's name for students pursuing education degrees. "I never knew my aunt," she told a local reporter, "but finding her gave our family peace. I hope this scholarship helps keep her love of teaching alive." For Sheriff Harrison, the case represented both triumph and caution. "We missed things in 2002, he admitted in a department meeting. "We had the right suspect early on, but lacked the tools or evidence to pursue him. Let this be a lesson that no lead is too small, no detail insignificant." The community's perception of Eric Chambers transformed overnight. The successful businessman and community leader was now revealed as someone who had built his life on a foundation of deception and violence. His construction company faltered as contracts were cancelled, eventually filing for bankruptcy. His second wife filed for divorce within weeks of his confession. Eric began serving his sentence at Missouri State Penitentiary, his fall from prominence complete. Former friends and associates distanced themselves, many expressing shock and betrayal. Some admitted they had seen warning signs in his controlling behavior, but had never imagined he was capable of murder. By Christmas 2023, Lakeview had settled into a new normal. The case that had defined the community for so long was closed, though its impact remained. Parents still cautioned children about traveling alone at night, but now the warning had a different tone. Not fear of the unknown, but awareness that danger can wear a familiar face. For Robert and Helen Anderson, the holiday marked their first with answers about their daughter's fate. They placed flowers on Melissa's grave, now properly marked with dates and an epitaph, "Teacher of children, light in our lives." Though the pain remained, the uncertainty that had haunted them for 20 years had finally lifted. Karen, who had put her life on hold to support her parents through decades of searching, began making plans to pursue the career she had abandoned. "Melissa would want us to live fully," she told her daughter Emma. "The best way to honor her memory is to embrace the opportunities she never had." As 2023 turned to 2024, the Anderson case was studied by law enforcement agencies across the country as an example of how persistence, technology, and community involvement could solve cases once considered unsolvable. Sheriff Harrison was invited to speak at conferences, sharing lessons learned and encouraging departments never to give up on cold cases. The small storage room at the Camden County Sheriff's Department, once filled with dusty boxes of unsolved cases, was renovated into a dedicated cold case unit. A framed photograph of Melissa Anderson hung on the wall, a reminder that every unsolved case represented someone's loved one waiting for answers. Though the media eventually moved on to newer stories, the ripples from Melissa's case continued spreading. Other families with missing loved ones reached out to Midwest mystery divers, hoping their specialized equipment might find vehicles that official searches had missed. Several cold cases across Missouri were reopened, investigators approaching old evidence with new technology and fresh perspectives. For Mark Donovan and his diving team, the Anderson case became their most significant discovery. "Sometimes searching murky waters for years feels futile," he reflected in a video commemorating the one-year anniversary of finding Melissa's car. But then you bring closure to a family like the Andersons, and you remember why every search matters, why we keep going back into the dark. In Lakeview, the students who placed flowers on Miss Anderson's memorial bench had never known her, but they knew her story. They grew up understanding both the tragedy of her loss and the triumph of justice eventually served. For them, Melissa became more than a local legend. She was a reminder that truth, however buried by time or water or deception, eventually finds its way to the surface. The spring of 2024 brought new growth to Lakeview. Cherry blossoms dotted the courthouse lawn, where months earlier, camera crews had jostled for position during Eric Chambers' sentencing. At Timber Lake, wildflowers surrounded Melissa's memorial bench, their colors reflecting in waters that had held secrets for 2 decades. In a modest apartment in Columbia, Jennifer Winters, Eric's first wife, placed the morning newspaper in her recycling bin. The headline announced the sale of Chambers Construction to a developer from Kansas City, the final chapter in the dismantling of Eric's business empire. She closed her eyes briefly, memories washing over her. The terrified young mother she'd been, the years of silence afterward, the weight of knowledge she'd carried alone. Her phone rang. Sheriff Harrison's name appeared on the screen. "Mrs. Winters," he began when she answered. "I'm calling because something unexpected has happened. A letter arrived for you at the department, forwarded from the state prison. Jennifer's breath caught. "From Eric?" "Yes. All prisoner mail is screened, and normally we wouldn't involve ourselves, but given the contents, I thought you should hear this from me first." Harrison explained that Eric had written a 12-page confession, more detailed than his court statement. He'd addressed it to Jennifer, but requested the sheriff ensure it reached her. "He's admitted to other incidents, Mrs. Winters. Nothing as serious as Melissa's death, but concerning nonetheless. He references an incident at Juniper Lake in 2001 involving a hiker who was reported missing and later found deceased. The case was ruled an accident at the time." Jennifer sank into a chair. "You think Eric was involved?" "His letter suggests he confronted the man for supposedly taking photographs of you while you were swimming. According to Eric, they argued, and he pushed the man who fell and hit his head on rocks." The revelation sent tremors through Jennifer. That summer day at the lake, she remembered Eric becoming agitated about a man with a camera nearby. He'd gone to speak with him while she packed their picnic. When Eric returned, he'd been oddly quiet, insisting they leave immediately. Days later, news reported a photographer's body found along the rocky shore. "There's more," Harrison continued. Eric mentions incidents where he tampered with the vehicles of men he believed were interested in you, and one case where he threatened a co-worker who complimented you at a company party. Jennifer pressed a hand to her mouth. I never knew. That's apparently why he's coming forward now. He says after 20 years of living with the truth about Melissa, he can't continue hiding these other incidents. He wants to clear his conscience before beginning therapy in prison. After hanging up, Jennifer sat motionless in her sunlit kitchen. The life she thought she'd known, even the troubled marriage she'd escaped, suddenly revealed deeper, darker dimensions. Eric's possessiveness, which she'd attributed to simple jealousy, had manifestations she'd never suspected. She wondered how differently things might have unfolded had she recognized these warning signs. Had she been less afraid to speak 20 years ago? Later that week, Sheriff Harrison convened a task force to investigate cold cases potentially connected to Eric Chambers. The photographer's death was reopened, along with 2 unsolved vandalism cases from 2002-2003, where vehicles had been damaged in Lakeview. The revelations reached the Andersons through Karen, who maintained contact with the sheriff's department. Helen listened silently as Karen relayed the information over tea in their kitchen. So Melissa wasn't his only victim, Helen said finally, her voice steady despite the emotion in her eyes. He'd hurt others before her. Robert, who had been watching birds at the feeder outside their window, turned slowly. Makes me wonder how many lives might have been different if he'd been stopped earlier. Their words echoed a question reverberating through Lakeview. How had warning signs been missed? How had someone capable of such violence operated undetected in their close-knit community? Lakeview Mayor Susan Collins addressed these concerns at a town meeting held in the high school gymnasium. What happened to Melissa Anderson, and potentially others, forces us to examine how we protect each other, she began, standing beneath banners from championship teams Eric had once played on. We need to create a community where warning signs are recognized, where concerns are voiced, where safety takes precedence over silence. The meeting spurred concrete actions. The school board implemented expanded training for teachers on recognizing concerning behaviors in students and adults. The sheriff's department established a confidential reporting system for domestic concerns. A support group formed for individuals who had experienced controlling relationships, meeting weekly in the community center. These changes reflected a community determined to learn from tragedy, to honor Melissa's memory by preventing similar stories from unfolding. But for those closest to the case, processing the events required more personal journeys. For Mark Donovan and the Midwest Mystery Divers, the Anderson case marked a turning point. Their YouTube channel, which had begun as documentation of underwater recoveries, evolved into advocacy for cold case funding. Using their platform, they highlighted dozens of unsolved disappearances across the Midwest, particularly cases where vehicles might have vanished into bodies of water. We're not just pulling cars from lakes anymore, Donovan explained in an interview with Missouri Public Radio. We're showing how modern technology can resolve questions that haunt families for decades. Every submerged vehicle is potentially someone's missing chapter. Their work attracted attention from law enforcement agencies nationwide. By summer 2024, they had assisted in solving 3 additional cold cases, 2 in Minnesota and 1 in Kentucky, bringing closure to families who had waited even longer than the Andersons for answers. Emma Anderson, Karen's daughter, who had initiated the search that found Melissa, accompanied the team on several dives, documenting their work for a documentary series. The shy college student who had emailed Donovan on a whim had discovered her own purpose in advocating for forgotten cases. Aunt Melissa's story showed me how a single persistent voice can make difference, she told viewers in the series premiere. Sometimes justice isn't about dramatic courtroom moments. Sometimes it's about simply refusing to let someone be forgotten. The documentary garnered critical acclaim, winning awards at independent film festivals and streaming on major platforms. Its success further amplified awareness of cold cases nationwide, with viewership spiking after each episode. Tips flooded into law enforcement agencies, some leading to meaningful developments in long-dormant investigations. For Sheriff Michael Harrison, the Anderson case represented both professional vindication and personal redemption. As a young deputy in 2002, he had been assigned to search the shoreline near Crescent Point. For years, he'd wondered if he had walked past evidence, missed something crucial that might have resolved the case sooner. "I carried that question for 2 decades, he admitted during a law enforcement conference in Kansas City. Did I fail Melissa Anderson by not looking hard enough? Now, I understand that solving cases like hers isn't about individual heroics. It's about persistence across time, about communities that refuse to forget, about families who keep searching when others have moved on." His perspective resonated with officers nationwide, particularly those working cold case units with limited resources. Harrison used his platform to advocate for dedicated funding for such departments, emphasizing that technological advances could now resolve cases previously considered unsolvable. In Lakeview, Harrison's advocacy translated into practical support. The county commission approved funding for a permanent cold case division within the sheriff's department. 2 dedicated detectives were assigned to review unsolved cases dating back to the 1970s, applying modern forensic techniques and database searches to evidence preserved from earlier investigations. Their first success came in October 2024, when they identified the perpetrator in a 1987 convenience store robbery that had left a clerk seriously injured. DNA from a hat left at the scene, preserved for 37 years in evidence storage, matched a man now living in Arizona. His arrest and subsequent confession demonstrated the impact of Harrison's persistence. At Juniper Creek High School, Melissa's legacy manifested differently. The photography teacher, inspired by the discovery of the undeveloped reunion cameras that proved crucial to solving the case, created a special curriculum unit on photography as witness. Students learned not only technical skills, but also the ethical dimensions of documentation and the potential for images to serve justice. Their year-end project involved partnering with local seniors to document and preserve stories from Lakeview's past. Through these intergenerational conversations, students recorded oral histories that might otherwise have been lost, creating a digital archive housed in the school's Melissa Anderson Memorial Library. One student interviewed former classmates of Melissa and Eric, capturing reflections on how they viewed the relationship in hindsight. These testimonies revealed subtle warning signs that had gone unrecognized. Eric's possessiveness framed as devotion, his anger dismissed as passion, his controlling behaviors normalized as masculine protectiveness. "We didn't have the language back then to identify what we were seeing," explained one woman who had been in their graduating class. "Things we called intense or passionate would now be recognized as controlling or concerning. Maybe if we'd had better education about healthy relationships, someone might have intervened before things escalated." Her observations sparked a curriculum review at the high school. By the 2024-2025 academic year, enhanced education on relationship dynamics and identifying concerning behaviors was integrated into health and social studies classes. Students learned to recognize warning signs not only in their own relationships, but in those of friends and family members. For Karen Anderson, watching these community changes unfold brought bittersweet comfort. Now 49, she had devoted over half her life to seeking answers about her sister's fate. With that chapter closed, she found herself navigating unfamiliar emotional territory, grief without the companion of uncertainty, loss without the drive of investigation. "For 20 years, finding Melissa was my purpose," she confided to Emma during a quiet moment at the lake. "Every birthday candle, every shooting star, every prayer was the same wish, to know what happened to her. Now that I know, I'm learning how to live without that question driving me." Karen's journey toward redefinition led her back to school. She enrolled in counseling courses at the University of Missouri, specializing in grief and trauma support. Her experiences as Melissa's sister, the years of ambiguous loss, the shock of discovery, the process of justice, provided insights textbooks couldn't teach. By fall 2024, she had established a support network for families of missing persons across Missouri. Monthly meetings alternated between in-person gatherings and virtual sessions, creating spaces where those living with uncertainty could share their experiences without judgment. When someone goes missing, friends often don't know what to say after the initial search ends, Karen explained during an interview about the network. The world moves on while you're frozen in time. Our group provides ongoing support for that unique pain, the pain of not knowing. The network quickly expanded beyond Missouri, connecting with similar groups nationwide. Karen became a respected advocate, consulting with law enforcement on communication with families of missing persons, and testifying before state legislators about the need for dedicated missing persons resources. For Robert and Helen Anderson, their daughter's case had brought answers, but not closure, a concept they gently rejected whenever well-meaning friends suggested it. "You don't close the chapter on your child," Helen explained to a documentary filmmaker who interviewed them on the second anniversary of finding Melissa. "You learn to carry their story differently. Before, we carried questions and uncertainty. Now we carry truth and memory. Both are heavy, just in different ways." At 75, the Andersons continued living in their farmhouse outside Lakeview, though health concerns had limited Robert's mobility. They had considered moving closer to town, but couldn't bear to leave the home where Melissa had grown up, where memories lived in every corner. Their perspective on justice evolved as they observed Eric Chambers' life in prison. Initial desires for punishment gradually transformed into hopes for reformation. When they learned Eric had begun speaking to prisoner support groups about controlling behavior and anger management, their reaction surprised those who expected resentment. If Melissa's story prevents someone else from making the choices Eric made, then something meaningful has come from our loss, Robert reflected. That's not forgiveness, not yet, but it's recognition that cycles can be broken. Helen nodded her agreement. Melissa was a teacher. In life, she taught children. In death, perhaps she's teaching a harder lesson to those who need it most. Their grace in the face of profound loss inspired a community initiative. The Melissa Anderson Foundation, established with donations that poured in after the case was resolved, funded both educational scholarships and innovative programs addressing domestic violence prevention. The foundation's board, which included Karen and Emma, focused particularly on early intervention programs for young men showing concerning behavior patterns. One such program paired at-risk teenagers with mentors trained to model healthy relationship dynamics. Through activities ranging from community service to outdoor adventures, these mentors demonstrated conflict resolution, emotional regulation, and respect for boundaries, skills some participants had never observed in their home environments. By its second year, the program showed promising results, with school counselors reporting significant behavioral improvements among participants. Several former mentees became mentors themselves, creating a growing network of positive influence throughout the community. For Jennifer Winters, Eric's first wife, healing took a different path. After receiving his confession letter, she faced difficult decisions about her own responsibility to speak about the past. The photographer's case had been reopened based on Eric's claims, but investigators needed her testimony about events she had witnessed. "I stayed silent once before," she told her current husband as they discussed the situation. "I can't make that same choice again." Her testimony proved crucial in corroborating Eric's confession about the photographer's death. Though painful, the process of speaking honestly about her former marriage allowed Jennifer to release the guilt she'd carried for decades. For the first time, she understood that her silence hadn't been simple cowardice, but a response to subtle intimidation and fear instilled over years. Working with a trauma specialist, Jennifer began recognizing how Eric's controlling behaviors had systematically undermined her confidence and independence. This awareness transformed her perspective on her younger self, replacing shame with compassion for the frightened young mother who had felt trapped in an increasingly dangerous situation. "I couldn't save Melissa," she acknowledged during a private conversation with Helen Anderson, arranged through victim services. "I'll always carry that regret. But by speaking now, maybe I can help protect someone else." Helen had reached across the table to grasp Jennifer's trembling hands. "You were a victim too," she said softly. "Different circumstances, different consequences, but still trapped by the same man's actions." That conversation marked the beginning of an unexpected friendship between the two women, bridging what might have been an insurmountable divide. They occasionally met for coffee, sharing memories of the early 2000s from their different perspectives, gradually constructing a more complete picture of the events that had shaped both their lives. Their connection symbolized the broader healing occurring in Lakeview, a community learning to address painful truths rather than burying them. This evolution manifested in practical ways, from expanded counseling services at the Community Health Center to improved training for law enforcement responding to domestic disturbance calls. At Timber Lake, Melissa's memorial bench became a place of reflection for many beyond her immediate family. Students brought flowers on her birthday. Couples in troubled relationships sometimes sat there, finding the courage to have difficult conversations. Families of other missing persons visited, drawing strength from a story where persistence had eventually yielded answers. On a crisp November morning in 2024, Emma Anderson sat on this bench, reviewing notes for her graduate school application. She had decided to pursue forensic psychology, inspired by her involvement in her aunt's case. The lake stretched before her, sunlight dancing on ripples where fishing boats drifted lazily near the opposite shore. Movement caught her attention, a woman approaching slowly along the path, carrying a small bouquet of wildflowers. Emma recognized Jennifer Winters, though they had never formally met. She watched as Jennifer placed the flowers carefully at the base of the memorial plaque, stood silent for several moments, then turned to leave. Their eyes met unexpectedly. After a moment's hesitation, Jennifer spoke. "You must be Emma. You look like your mother, and like Melissa from the photographs." Emma nodded. "You brought flowers." "It's 22 years today since the reunion," Jennifer explained. "I wanted to mark it somehow." They sat together on the bench, two women connected by tragedy yet focused on healing. Their conversation ranged from Jennifer's work with domestic violence survivors to Emma's documentary projects, finding common ground in their commitment to preventing similar stories. As sunset approached, painting the lake in amber and gold, they walked together toward the parking area. "What you did," Jennifer said before they parted, "sending that email, starting the search that found Melissa, it didn't just bring answers about her. It created ripples that have changed countless lives, including mine." Emma considered this. "I never thought of it that way. I just couldn't bear my mother's pain, my grandparents growing older without answers." "Sometimes the most significant changes begin with the simplest actions," Jennifer replied. One email, one search, one truth finally spoken. Their meeting embodied the central lesson of Melissa's case, that healing often comes not from forgetting painful histories, but from confronting them directly. That community strength emerges from acknowledging vulnerabilities rather than concealing them. That even decades-old wounds can begin to mend when truth finally emerges. As 2024 drew to a close, Lakeview prepared for another winter. At the elementary school, a new generation of children learned in classrooms, much like the one Melissa had once decorated so lovingly. At the high school, students studied relationship dynamics alongside algebra and literature. At the sheriff's department, cold case detectives methodically reviewed evidence from other unsolved mysteries. The story of Melissa Anderson and the 20-year search for answers had transformed from current events to community history. It would be told and retold, reshaped by time and perspective, becoming part of the shared narrative that defined Lakeview. But unlike many stories that fade with retelling, this one had left concrete changes in its wake. New protocols, expanded resources, heightened awareness. On New Year's Eve, the Andersons hosted a small gathering at their farmhouse. Karen and Emma were there, along with Sheriff Harrison and his wife, several friends who had participated in the original searches, and even Mark Donovan, in town to discuss another potential case with the sheriff's department. As midnight approached, they moved to the porch despite the winter chill. Robert raised a glass toward the star-filled sky. "To Melissa," he said simply. "To truth that surfaces even after 20 years. To justice that may be delayed but ultimately arrives." The others joined the toast, their breath visible in the cold air. Above them, stars glittered against the vast darkness, the same stars Melissa had gone to watch on that August night in 2002, unaware she was driving toward both her end and a beginning. For while her life had been cut tragically short, the long search for answers had created ripples of change that would continue spreading long after those who knew her were gone. As midnight bells chimed from the distant town, Helen squeezed Robert's hand. "She's still teaching," she whispered. "Still making a difference." In that moment, on the threshold of a new year, they understood that Melissa's legacy wasn't defined by how she died, but by what her story had ultimately brought to life. Awareness, protection, healing, and a community forever changed by the courage of those who refused to let truth remain buried beneath the waters of time. By early 2025, the story of Melissa Anderson had traveled far beyond the borders of Camden County. A national news magazine produced a special titled 2 Decades Underwater, The Melissa Anderson Case, featuring interviews with the Anderson family, Sheriff Harrison, and the Midwest Mystery Divers. True crime podcasts analyzed the investigation in multi-episode series, drawing parallels to similar cases nationwide. Online forums debated the evidence, the trial, and the broader implications for cold case investigations. This attention brought unexpected challenges to Lakeview. Tourism increased as true crime enthusiasts visited Timber Lake, taking photographs at Melissa's memorial bench and driving past significant locations connected to the case. Local businesses benefited from the influx, but many residents felt uncomfortable with their community's tragedy becoming a macabre attraction. Mayor Collins addressed these concerns at a town council meeting in February. "While we cannot control public interest in what happened here, we can shape how our community responds." Melissa Anderson was not just a case. She was our neighbor, a teacher who shaped young minds, a daughter and sister deeply loved. We honor her memory not by sensationalizing her death, but by continuing the positive changes her story has inspired. Following this guidance, the town implemented subtle measures to preserve dignity while acknowledging reality. Signs at Timber Lake requested visitors treat the memorial site with respect. Local tour guides incorporated broader historical context into their narratives, emphasizing Lakeview's resilience rather than just the tragedy. The elementary school library named for Melissa focused on her contributions as an educator rather than the circumstances of her death. These efforts reflected a community determined to control its own narrative, to ensure that a single tragic event didn't define them, while still honoring the lessons learned from that event. It was a delicate balance, maintaining truth without becoming trapped by it. For Emma Anderson, the national attention created both opportunities and obligations. Television producers approached her about rights to her documentary footage, offering substantial payment. Publishers expressed interest in a book about her role in solving her aunt's case. These opportunities promised financial security and wider platforms for advocacy, but came with ethical considerations about profiting from family tragedy. After careful reflection and family discussions, Emma declined most commercial offers. Instead, she partnered with a non-profit organization focused on cold case advocacy, providing her footage for educational purposes. The resulting documentary, Finding Melissa, premiered at a criminal justice conference in Chicago, focusing less on sensational details and more on procedural improvements needed to resolve similar cases. "My goal was never fame or financial gain," Emma explained during a panel discussion following the screening. "It was always about answers. For my family first, but ultimately for every family living with questions about a missing loved one." Her principled approach earned respect from law enforcement professionals attending the conference. Several agencies subsequently implemented protocols based on recommendations highlighted in the documentary, particularly regarding coordination between volunteer search organizations and official investigations. Meanwhile, the ripples from Eric Chambers' confession continued spreading. Following his revelation about the photographer's death, investigators in Colombia re-examined several unsolved cases from areas where Eric had lived or worked. Their efforts revealed a pattern more extensive than initially suspected. In April 2025, the district attorney announced additional charges against Eric related to 3 previously unsolved incidents: the photographer's death, now classified as manslaughter, tampering with a witness in a 2001 business dispute, and arson at a competitor's construction site in 2009. These charges could potentially add years to his sentence. The expanded investigation exposed how Eric had maintained a respectable public image while systematically eliminating obstacles to his ambitions. Former employees came forward with accounts of threatening behavior, financial improprieties, and retribution against those who challenged him. Business competitors described suspicious equipment failures, targeted vandalism, and abrupt client departures following encounters with Eric. What emerges is a portrait of someone who operated by different rules than the rest of us, the district attorney explained at a press conference. Someone who viewed normal boundaries, legal, ethical, interpersonal, as inconveniences to be circumvented rather than principles to be respected. This characterization resonated with Jennifer Winters, who continued working with investigators to document Eric's controlling behaviors during their marriage. Through therapy, she had begun recognizing how gradually these patterns had developed, small boundary violations that escalated so incrementally she hadn't recognized the danger until it was too late. Jennifer channeled these insights into prevention work, developing a curriculum for high schools about recognizing early warning signs in relationships. "Control doesn't announce itself," she told students during presentations. "It disguises itself as care, as protection, as devotion. Learning to distinguish between love and control might be the most important relationship skill you'll ever develop." Her program, initially piloted in Lakeview, expanded to schools throughout Missouri, then neighboring states. By identifying subtle controlling behaviors, jealousy framed as flattery, isolation presented as specialness, monitoring disguised as interest, Jennifer helped young people recognize dynamics she had missed in her own relationship with Eric. For Sheriff Harrison, the expanding case against Eric Chambers validated his department's methodical approach. Rather than rushing to charge Eric solely for Melissa's death, they had built a comprehensive case that revealed the full pattern of behavior. This thorough investigation ensured that even if one charge faced legal challenges, others would likely succeed. "Justice isn't just about punishment for a single act," Harrison explained to a criminology class at the University of Missouri, where he occasionally guest lectured. "It's about recognizing patterns, protecting communities from ongoing threats, and creating accountability that extends beyond a single incident." His perspective influenced how the department approached other cold cases. Rather than viewing each unsolved crime in isolation, detectives began looking for connections across jurisdictions and time periods. This networked approach led to progress on several cases previously considered dead ends. Most significantly, in June 2025, this methodology helped solve the disappearance of a college student who had vanished from a campground near Timber Lake in 1998. Re-examining evidence with awareness of geographic patterns related to other solved cases. Investigators identified a suspect, a former campground employee with a history of harassment complaints who had worked at multiple sites where women had disappeared. When investigators presented their evidence, the suspect confessed to 3 previously unsolved cases. For the families involved, the resolution brought the same bittersweet mixture of grief and relief the Andersons had experienced. Pain at confirmed loss, but relief from the torture of uncertainty. Karen Anderson attended the press conference announcing these developments, sitting quietly in the back of the room. Afterward, she approached one of the victims' mothers, introducing herself simply as someone who understands what you're going through. That conversation led to the woman joining Karen's support network for families of missing persons, where she found understanding impossible to access elsewhere. The network had grown substantially since its inception, now serving over 200 families across the Midwest. Monthly meetings alternated between in-person gatherings and virtual sessions, creating spaces where those living with uncertainty could share experiences without judgment. Karen had assembled resources ranging from legal advisors to trauma counselors, all specializing in issues unique to families of the missing. When someone goes missing, friends often don't know what to say after the initial search ends, Karen explained during a radio interview about the network. The world moves on while you're frozen in time. Our group provides ongoing support for that unique pain, the pain of not knowing. Her advocacy work had transformed her from a woman defined by her sister's disappearance into a recognized expert on supporting families through similar circumstances. Law enforcement agencies consulted her about communication protocols, and victim services organizations invited her to train their staff. The painful expertise she had never sought became a lifeline for others navigating similar journeys. For Robert and Helen Anderson, watching their younger daughter flourish in this role brought pride mingled with sorrow. Karen found purpose in the pain, Helen remarked to a close friend. That's what Melissa would have wanted, for something meaningful to emerge from what happened. The Andersons remained in their farmhouse outside Lakeview, though Robert's health had declined noticeably. At 76, his movements had slowed, and heart problems limited his activities. Yet he insisted on maintaining certain rituals, tending Melissa's memorial garden behind the house, walking to the mailbox each day, sitting on the porch swing each evening to watch the sunset. This is where Melissa grew up, he explained, when well-meaning friends suggested they consider a more manageable living arrangement. This is where she learned to ride a bike, where she climbed trees and did homework at the kitchen table. I'm not leaving those memories behind. Helen understood and supported his decision, though she quietly made contingency plans with Karen should his health deteriorate further. For now, they found comfort in familiar surroundings filled with echoes of their daughter's presence, her handprints in the concrete of the garden path, the height marks on the kitchen doorframe, the creaking step on the stairs that had announced her arrival home from school. In July 2025, the Andersons received unexpected correspondence from the Missouri Department of Corrections. Eric Chambers had requested a restorative justice meeting with them, a facilitated conversation where he could express remorse directly, and they could ask questions prison restrictions had previously prevented. The request provoked intense discussion within the family. Karen initially opposed any contact, protective of her parents' emotional well-being. Emma, viewing the situation through her forensic psychology studies, saw potential value in such a conversation. Robert and Helen considered their options silently for several days before reaching a decision. We want to hear what he has to say, Helen told Karen over Sunday dinner. Not for his sake, but for ours. There are questions only he can answer about Melissa's final moments, about why he kept silent for so long. Are you sure you're ready for those answers? Karen asked gently. Robert nodded. We've lived with uncertainty for 20 years. Now we're living with partial truth. Whatever he tells us, however painful, completes the picture. We need that completion. The meeting took place in August, in a conference room at the prison carefully arranged to balance security with dignity. A trained restorative justice facilitator guided the process, establishing ground rules and monitoring the emotional temperature of the conversation. Helen and Robert sat side by side, hands clasped on the table between them as Eric was escorted in. 3 years into his sentence, Eric looked markedly different from the confident businessman who had once built a construction empire. Prison had thinned his frame and grayed his hair. He moved hesitantly, eyes downcast, until he took his seat across from the Andersons. "Thank you for coming," he began, voice raspy with emotion. "I know nothing I say can undo what I did or ease your pain, but I owe you the complete truth about that night." For nearly 2 hours, Eric spoke about details he had omitted from his court confession. He described his obsession with Melissa after seeing her at the reunion, how her dismissal had triggered rage he couldn't control. He admitted to following her to Crescent Point, to their argument escalating when she threatened to tell his wife about his behavior. The blow that killed her had been impulsive, but not entirely unintentional, a moment where anger overwhelmed reason. He described the panic afterward, the calculating way he had staged the scene, the cold fear that had accompanied him as he swam to shore. Most painfully for the Andersons, he revealed that Melissa had been conscious when he placed her in the car, that she had looked at him with recognition before he pushed the vehicle into the lake. Throughout his account, Helen and Robert remained composed, asking occasional clarifying questions. When Eric finished, the room fell silent. The facilitator asked if they wanted to respond. Helen spoke first, her voice steady despite tears tracking down her cheeks. "For years I imagined Melissa afraid and alone in her final moments. It's horrible to know you were there, that you caused her death. But at least now I know she wasn't lost and confused on those dark roads. I know exactly what happened to my daughter." Robert leaned forward. "I have one question. In 20 years, did you ever think about coming forward? Before you were caught?" Eric swallowed hard. "Yes, many times, especially after my daughter was born. I'd look at her and think about what I'd taken from you, but fear always won out. I convinced myself it was too late, that confessing would only cause more pain." "Your silence was another crime," Robert said quietly. "Every day we searched, every night we couldn't sleep. You could have ended that at any time." When the meeting concluded, Helen and Robert left the prison physically exhausted, but emotionally lighter. The complete truth, however painful, had filled gaps in their understanding that had troubled them for years. They didn't forgive Eric, neither felt that was their place, but they had reclaimed a measure of power by confronting him directly. "I expected to hate him more after seeing him," Helen confided to Karen that evening. "Instead, I mostly felt pity. He has to live with what he did forever, just as we do. The difference is that we have each other, have purpose and meaning. He has nothing but regret." The meeting represented a turning point for the Andersons, a shift from seeking justice to pursuing healing. Having achieved the former, they could now focus more fully on the latter. This transition manifested in small but significant ways. Helen began volunteering at the elementary school library named for Melissa. Robert finally sorted through boxes of Melissa's belongings, selecting meaningful items for display rather than keeping everything preserved as if awaiting her return. For their wedding anniversary in September, they took their first overnight trip since Melissa's body had been found, visiting a bed and breakfast in the Ozarks. Though they carried memories with them, they also created new ones, hiking to a waterfall, enjoying dinner at a lakeside restaurant, watching stars from an inn porch reminiscent of their own. "We're learning to live forward again," Helen told Karen upon their return. "For so long we were frozen in 2002, everything oriented around what happened then. Now we're finding ways to honor Melissa while still embracing the present." This philosophy informed their approach to Melissa's upcoming birthday in October, what would have been her 49th year. Rather than holding the somber candlelight ceremony that had marked this date for decades, they organized a community service day in her memory. Volunteers gathered to refurbish the elementary school playground, plant trees along Timber Lake's shore, and assemble care packages for families of missing persons. The event drew participants from across generations, former students now approaching middle age, colleagues from her teaching days, young people who knew her only as a name on a memorial bench. Working side by side, they shared stories that celebrated Melissa's life rather than focusing solely on her death. "My third-grade classroom was covered in stars," recalled a woman now teaching at the same school. "Miss Anderson let us add a new one every time we finished a book. By June, you could barely see the ceiling. She taught me to swim when I was terrified of water," another participant shared. "Spent her lunch breaks with me at the community pool for a month until I could cross the deep end." These stories painted a fuller portrait of Melissa than any investigation or trial could provide. They restored dimensions to her memory, transforming her from victim back to the vibrant, creative teacher she had been. For her family, hearing these recollections brought Melissa back to life in ways that photographs and mementos could not. As volunteers gathered for a closing ceremony at sunset, Emma unveiled a mosaic bench created for the elementary school playground. Children had contributed painted tiles depicting books, stars, and other symbols associated with Melissa's teaching. The resulting piece glowed with color in the fading light, practical and beautiful, much like the woman it honored. "My aunt would have loved this," Emma told the assembled group. "Not because it bears her name, but because it's a place where children will gather, where stories will be shared, where learning will happen through play. That's the legacy she would have wanted." Sheriff Harrison, attending with his wife, nodded in agreement. True justice isn't just about solving cases or securing convictions. It's about remembering what was lost, restoring what can be restored, and creating meaning from experiences that initially seem only destructive. His words resonated beyond this particular case. Throughout Camden County, perspectives on justice had evolved. The Sheriff's Department now emphasized not just clearing cases, but supporting victims and families throughout the process. The prosecutor's office had established a victim advocacy division specializing in cold cases. The courts had implemented trauma-informed practices for witnesses testifying about long-past events. These systemic changes ensured that future cases would be handled differently, that other families might find answers sooner, might receive more comprehensive support, might navigate loss with more resources than the Andersons had available to them in 2002. As darkness fell over the gathering, Helen lit a single candle, placed at the center of the mosaic bench. "For 20 years we lit candles asking for answers," she said, voice carrying across the hushed playground. "Today we light this one in gratitude, for the answers we received, for the community that never stopped searching, for the positive changes that have emerged from our loss." The flame flickered in the gentle autumn breeze, casting warm light across faces young and old. In that moment, Melissa's story transcended tragedy, becoming instead a testament to persistence, to truth that surfaces even after decades underwater, to a community forever changed by refusing to forget. As winter approached, Mark Donovan and the Midwest mystery divers prepared for their final expedition of the year. Their YouTube channel had grown to over 2 million subscribers. Their equipment had been upgraded through partnerships with technology companies, and their methodology had been adopted by search teams nationwide. Before leaving Lakeview, where they had returned to assist with another cold case, Donovan visited Timber Lake one last time. Standing at Melissa's memorial bench, he reflected on how a single email from Emma had cascaded into changes no one could have predicted, not just for the Anderson family, but for countless others touched by similar uncertainty. "People sometimes ask if this work is depressing," he explained to a film student documenting their process. "Finding vehicles containing human remains, confirming families' worst fears. But what they don't understand is that uncertainty can be more torturous than painful truth. What we provide isn't just answers, It's the possibility of moving forward, of grieving properly, of reclaiming life after years of suspension. His perspective echoed what the Andersons had discovered: that truth, however difficult, creates foundations for healing that ambiguity cannot. Their journey from desperate searches to eventual answers had transformed not only their own lives, but an entire community's understanding of justice, memory, and resilience. As snowflakes began falling over Timber Lake, dusting Melissa's memorial with crystalline white, Donovan placed a smooth stone on the bench, a diver's token of respect. Then he turned toward his waiting team, ready to bring similar resolution to another family, another case, another community where questions had lingered too long without answers. The legacy of Melissa Anderson, teacher, daughter, sister, catalyst for change, continued expanding through these ripples of influence. Her story, once merely a painful mystery, had become a source of inspiration and transformation. Proof that even 2 decades underwater cannot prevent truth from eventually rising to the surface. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.